A very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are located and whatever your time zone is. Welcome to our Chronicles, and this is Rita Gadi. We are now on the third day of May, but there is something that we would like to recall, which is the 1st of May. Of course, Labor Day is a special holiday. We celebrate this throughout the country. And every year there are announcements that are normally being made regarding the situation of our workforce, labor as it is, as we know it. It traces back historically to many, many years when unions are being formed and several other negotiations were going on between employer and employee relationship. But then, because of the evolution of many of our labor provisions in the labor code, and also because of several attempts being made by several governments, it is now even more understandable that Labor Day is being celebrated to help and to increase not just the wages, but also the conditions of our workers. But of course, the most important is jobs, as far as that is concerned. But I go back to May 1st, and this is the anniversary, the wedding anniversary, or the wedding day, actually, of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. Sometime back, many years ago, when I was beginning to tell the story of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos, perhaps 7, 8 years ago, that was still the Rita Gadi hour. And we went through several episodes in their lives just so as we could focus on how they met, how they got married, and of course, the life that they lived together until the death of President Marcos sometime in 1989. I will go back to that now after having spoken of it so many years ago, only in memory, recuerdo as we would say it. The memory that I have of how it was that Imelda at one time, or several times as a matter of fact, for many, many years, she has conveyed her story. And I've written this down religiously, solicitously, and as best as I could. From the time that she could remember when she was born, insofar as what her parents would say as when she was just a baby, many of the statements made by her father, her uncles, her grandparents, and so forth. But what I'm trying to arrive at actually is how I have written down her story herself in the first person. In other words, it begins with I, Imelda, in many ways. This was part of the fact that at one time she suffered some kind of a brain concussion, something which needed a minor surgery. And so she was confined for a while until that clot was removed. And after that, she was in the recovery room when her brother, the late Kokoy Romualdez, her brother, called for me. And there was some of her friends likewise, and then she said that it's about time that somebody would write her story. And so I said, well, it would really be an honor if I could do this. And so that was where it began, when she was already recovering in many instances. Every time she had time, she would call for me and we talked about her life. So first it was not chronological, but I had to remind her that we have to do it that way, so that as I am writing it down, I am being able to arrange how it was, and I could refer several instances of her life with other people her brothers, especially her aunts, her cousins, and so forth, just to be able to substantiate many of the things that she remembers. So that has already been completed many years back. It's the complete volume actually is 800 pages, single typewritten on ordinary bond paper. So that's how it goes. And now that we are commemorating, for instance, am commemorating again their wedding day, which is May 1st. I'd like to go back to how it was, as she relayed it to me, likewise. And as many people will remember also the circumstances around her life in the early years before she met Ferdinand and in the years thereafter when they got married. So what was this anyway? So she's a graduate of the college in Tacloban. Remember that her mother died when she was 8 years old, and after that, her father decided to move the family to Tacloban. They stayed in a town adjacent to Tacloban, which is the town of Olot, and she would visit Tacloban every once in a while. But of course, she schooled in the local college there until she finished. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in education, and her major was both in history and in geography. So you can imagine how important the subjects were to her eventually in her life, as she was also the traveling diplomat of President Marcos in many strategic diplomatic missions that she undertook for the Republic of the Philippines. So she graduated then, an education bachelor's degree, and she was given the first grade in the Chinese school to teach. So she went to the principal and asked, "But why am I going to teach first grade?" And so the principal said, "Because that is the most important year for the child. That would be the first time that the children would be open, their minds would be open to knowledge, to learning, to the things that they will learn outside of the home. And we have to choose the best teacher that can do this. And you are one of the best that we have, because grade 1 is vital for the development of the child's mind. The first impact that the mind of a child would have with the outside world, outside of the home. Her first lessons, actually, in character, in values, and then, of course, in the other subjects that are part of the curricula for that particular grade. And so when she was explained that that was the reason she was brought to grade 1, she felt 10 feet tall, believing the statement made by the principal that indeed it is very crucial for the teacher to be able to open the minds of the children well, and that the competence of the teacher is so important, especially for these young minds. Okay, so she was teaching, but prior to that, we have heard many instances when she was usually chosen to um, welcome dignitaries and guests that will be coming to Tacloban. We are aware of how often we have seen this. Usually the prettiest ladies or the most intelligent of them are there at the airport with bouquets of flowers for the dignitaries that were arriving, and most often it was Imelda that was chosen to welcome the guests. And under the heat of the sun, of course, she had to brave all of this. And then, of course, we also had the story about her being the Rose of Tacloban, and that was some kind of not just a beauty contest, but she was really chosen to be the Rose of Tacloban, the loveliest of all the young ladies at the time. And she was telling the story of how difficult it was to be inside a giant rose and to have yourself crouch, as a matter of fact, until you get to until the what do you call this, until the truck carrying that giant rose would be in front of the VIP stand where the VIP guests and the officials were seated. And only then with the rose open, and then she could stretch out her head and then appear in all her beauty and glory as the Rose of Tacloban. So she was saying, hindi yan madali. Pinapawisan ka sa loob sapagkat nakayuko ka kasi nakasara yung bulaklak at bubukas lang yan pag nasa harap na ng grandstand. So anyway, then after the Rose of Tacloban, she was always invited to sing at special occasions when there were also important events. And so she was used to this because normally they would get the prettiest and also the one that's most conversant. And she was both of that. Until one day, her relatives, her brothers, her elder brothers and sisters, remember she's the eldest of the second batch of children of her father. The first batch of her half sisters were already professionals. The eldest was Dr. Lot, Dr. Lourdes Romualdez. She was already working with the rural health office. And then you had another sister who was already a consul in Spain. And then, of course, you have Sister Bellarmine, who was the superior general of the College of the Holy Ghost at the time, which is the College of the Holy Spirit. And then you had engineer and then a lawyer, etc. So that was the first batch. Imelda was the second of the second wife of her father Orestes, the daughter of both Remedios Trinidad from Bulacan and Orestes Romualdez. And being the eldest, she was also the tallest among her class and the most beautiful, as they would say at the time, as far as the city of Tacloban is concerned. So her cousins, her uncles, her aunties, and several others, her sisters, her elder half sisters, were a little worried about what would happen to her future, because most of those that were courting her were either agents of medicine, medical products, ano bang tawag sa labang medrep as you call them today, some lawyers, insurance agents, etc. Sila lang kasi yung mga nakakurbata at that time. And then of course, there would be visitors coming from Manila. The rectos, for instance, and even Elpidio Quirino at one time, requested if he could dance with her at one occasion that he was invited. And he could dance with the young lady Imelda. Anyway, that was it. They were a little concerned about who else could be courting her appropriately and, of course, for a better future that Imelda would have. Okay, so what happened then was they decided that maybe she should go to Manila and perhaps track her future there, because anyway, she was already a college graduate, so she could be exposed to the city of Manila and so forth. And then her cousin, Danieling Romualdez, was the speaker of the House of Representatives, so she could live with them. Speaker Romualdez, Danieling Romualdez, was married to Paz Gueco from Pampanga. They had no children. So it would be a very welcome incident for them to be able to have Imelda with them, actually. So that was how it was, and that is why it was important for them to realize that they were all concerned about Imelda's future. So that's how she was brought to Manila, to live with Speaker Danieling Romualdez and Paz Gueco. And they decided that perhaps because she had a good singing voice, they enrolled her at the Philippine Women's University for advanced studies in music and in voice lessons, and that she was also, well, briefly she worked at the P.E. Domingo piano store in Escolta, because her uncles had a law firm just about a block away, so they could watch her, and they were so concerned about people who would be men who would be courting her and so forth. So that was her immediate life at the time when she got to Manila. Well, one day when remember at the time, but I forgot to mention this. I should mention it that at her high school graduation, who was the guest of honor, guest of speaker, it was Congressman Ferdinand and Marcos. Well, when I asked her how she thought of him, and she said, well, he had a good voice and a very good command of English and so forth, but nothing extraordinary that she mentioned, except that she said that everybody thought that Ferdinand Edralin Marcos, the congressman, was the most eligible, the most handsome um, bachelor congressman then at the time. So I just had to mention that. When she got to Manila, I have to mention this. Historically, the political scenery had only two political parties. That was the Liberal Party and the Nacionalista Party. The Romualdeses belonged to the Nacionalista Party. In fact, the speaker, Danieling Romualdez, was Nacionalista. And then you had the grand old man of the Nacionalista Party, Amang Rodriguez. But then you had also the Liberal Party, and at the time, you had also the luminary. Of course, you had the outstanding Liberal Party men. Many of them I will mention later on. But that was how it was. The two political parties contending for all the positions in government, elected positions in government, Nacionalista and Liberal Party. And as I've said, the Romualdeses were Nacionalista, and then Marcos was in the Liberal Party. At the time, they were having the budget deliberation, and we all are aware of the fact that whenever there are deliberations in the budget, talagang mainit ang debate dito, even up to this day. They would stay for long hours, even in the early morning hours, just to discuss certain provisions in the budget that they were working on. That's the General Appropriations Act. So there you have Marcos and the Liberal Party really going through the budget prepared by the Liberal Party and really going over very solicitously on the provisions that were actually included. So you can imagine the debate that was going on. So as I've said, the way it was then, it also happens today that you have the deliberations going on until the early hours of the morning. Well, one evening, her cousin-in-law, Paz Gueco, she was staying with them, the wife of Speaker Romualdez, decided, Meldy, punta na tayo sa Congress para pag makita tayo ni Speaker, baka pwedeng mag-recess muna sila at masyado ng malalim ang gabi. Nakakapagod na rin sa kanila. So, sunduin na natin sila at magpakita tayo doon kay Speaker. So that was the night that they decided to go and fetch Speaker Romualdez, because the budget deliberations are really ongoing to the late hours that evening. Nonetheless, they stayed in the parking lot. Remember, this was still the old Congress. That's now the museum, the National Museum today. So andun ang Congress noon, on the first floor and the second floor, I think on another portion of that building, you had the Senate also. But that was where the Congress was, and as I've said, that was the season of the debates on the floor regarding the national budget. So they stayed in the parking lot in the car, waiting, although they sent the driver, I think, to inform the speaker that they were already there. So magtigil muna, rest muna kayo, uwi na muna tayo, and so forth. Pero nilamok sila. There were mosquitoes there in the parking lot. And so, Mrs. Romualdez, Mrs. Paz Gueco Romualdez decided, punta tayo sa canteen. But Imelda hesitated for a moment kasi sabi niya, naku, hindi ako nakabis, nakachinelas lang at nakaduster. In other words, they both thought that they would just be staying in the car to wait for Speaker. They were not dressed for the occasion of entering the House of Representatives. And so Mrs. Paz Gueco Romualdez said, dito na lang tayo sa likod. Hindi naman tayo siguro mahalata. Tsaka sa canteen, marami namang upuan doon na hindi na naman kailangan na nakabihis tayo and so forth. So they went to the canteen of Congress and stayed there waiting for the speaker. And then who comes in? Oh my goodness. Congressman Marcos immediately saw her from a distance. But you know how it was. Protocol was still to be observed. And so he asked, sino yun? Sino yung magandang dalaga doon? And so they whispered, ay, pinsan ni Speaker Romualdez, si Imelda yon, taga Tacloban, kasama ni Mrs. Pascueco. And so Congressman Marcos at the time wanted to meet with her, but had to look for somebody who would be introducing them. I wrote the name of that congressman. He was Congressman Jacobo. Let me read my handwriting. Jacobo Gonzalez from Laguna. So Congressman Marcos told this Congressman Jacobo Gonzalez, could you please ask the speaker if I could be introduced to his cousin, that Imelda, that beautiful Imelda there at the far end of the canteen. So that was what happened. Pinakilala, and as soon as Congressman Marcos at the time was introduced, he held his hand out to shake hand and say hello. But Imelda said he pressed it quite firmly and then whispered, would you mind if you could please stand up? Nagulat siya, bakit siya patatayuin? But then it was Congressman Marcos who wanted to find out how tall she was, because even when she was seated, parang matangkad, baka matangkad dito sa akin. So she stood up, she was barely hiding her slippers under the table. And when she stood up, I think Congressman Marcos tried to measure who was taller, and so parang pareho sila. And then he said, thank you very much. And so when she sat down, I don't know what else was exchanged. Mrs. Marcos did not elaborate anymore what other items they talk about, except that before he went back to the session hall, he whispered again and said, I will marry you. And then he left. And she was really quite surprised. So I am trying to go back in time for the story that Imelda told me regarding that historical, fateful evening when they first met at the Canteen of Congress, because that was where it all began. Oh my goodness. And Congressman Ferdinand Marcos is completely smitten, not only by her beauty, by the fact that he just, love at first sight. Really, nabighani talaga. And so, what was happening was, nung nalaman niyan sa Malacañang, nung nalaman niya ng nasa Nationalista Party and all of that, because at the time, the president was Magsaysay, Nationalista Party, and the other congressmen in the Nationalista Party were really already on edge trying to defend their budget. So President Magsaysay told Speaker Romualdez, kasama niya sa Partidong Nasyonalista, sabihan mo yung asawa mo, papuntahin si Imelda sa Congress madalas para si Marcos hindi man na masyadong magdidebate on the floor. So, and that's exactly what was happening. Every time Congressman Marcos would know that Imelda was there in the gallery, in the gallery where the audience was seated, spectators, they would call them. He would take a break and say hello to her, and so forth. So hindi masyadong mainit yung debates on the floor, because he was really distracted in a way, because he kept on looking at Imelda and he kept on talking to her. Anyway, that was what was happening. That was the story that Imelda said. And that was the reason why she and her cousin had to go there. And there was even one time when they came from a dinner, and she was dressed in an evening gown or so. And then they had to rush to Congress, and they wanted to change, but then they had to be there at a certain time. So lalong nagulat si Marcos kasi ang ganda pala talaga, lalo na pagka nakabihis, naka-evening gown, and so forth. So that's the story of Congress when they first met, and how he really pursued the fact that I will marry you was the words he used when they first met. Then it was close to Holy Week, and there were rumors that the Romualdeses, Speaker Romualdez, and all the other Romualdeses in Manila would be flying to Hong Kong for the Holy Week because that was the break. Yun yung break nila sa Congress at the time, sa House of Representatives. So si Marcos already got tickets also. He checked with the office of the speaker what day are they leaving and what flight are they taking and so forth for Hong Kong. But then what happened was, kasi ang dami-dami palang kasama and all that, and they only had 1 week. So the speaker decided hindi na lang sa Hong Kong. Let's just go to Baguio. So that was it. There was a long trip from Manila to Baguio. At the time, wala pa yung Pan-Philippine Highway na yan. Wala pa yung NLEX na papaakyat ng Baguio. And you had a stopover, which still happened for quite a while. Or even if the highway was already built, there was still the stopover in Tarlac. You remember the restaurant in Tarlac, the famous restaurant there where people would stop, take a break for a while before the long trip. And the vehicle of Marcos was following the other vehicles of the Romualdeses, where Imelda was seated together with her cousins and the speaker. And so they stopped in Tarlac for a while. And so Congressman Marcos approached the speaker and then said, is it okay if Imelda would sit with us in the car? Because anyway, I am with Joe Guevara. Joe Guevara was a famous columnist at the time. So he said, may kasama naman. And so the speaker said, obliged. Sige na, okay, pwede na. So from Tarlac to Baguio, Imelda sat with Marcos in his vehicle, and Joe Guevara was with them, and of course the driver and so forth. And so along the way, Dato San Marcos was saying that, well, now I have the ring of, what's this, of the Upsilonian. He was a member of the Upsilonian fraternity. But when we come down from Baguio, you will already be wearing a wedding ring. So porsigido talaga. Even at the time when they were going up to Baguio, he already kept on mentioning, I will marry you, we will get married and so forth and all that. So Imelda was just listening and brushing this off, and she was perhaps kinikilig in a way, if you would call it that. But I also have to mention that every day Marcos would give her 2 roses. One rose was just open and the other rose was just still a bud. And so Imelda asked, bakit dalawa ito? And so Marcos explained to her, yung isang nakabukas, yung pagmamahal ko sa ngayon, at yung nakasara, yan ang pagmamahal ko bukas, at bubukas din yan, and so forth. So that was part of the courtship anyway. And then when they got to Baguio, you had all the rituals in the Catholic Church about Holy Thursday, etc., and all Visita Iglesia and all of that. And that was when Imelda learned that Ferdinand and Ralin Marcos was an Aglipayan. This is the Catholic Church, the nationalist Catholic. It's still Catholic, but it is now under the Aglipay, which translated everything in Tagalog, the kind of a nationalistic religion that they had, and several changes that their priests could get married and so forth. So that was the religion of Marcos at the time. But when Imelda learned this, sabi niya, naku, paano ba ito? So I don't know at what particular timeline Ferdinand Marcos decided to be baptized a Catholic. But during the Holy Week rituals, when you had all of these ceremonies about the last seven last words, the prayers for the Visita Iglesia and all of this, Sabado de Gloria and the Easter Sunday, and of course that very long litany of the heritage of Marcos. Remember, that was also mentioned at the time, and all of those prayers actually memoriado. Marcos was able to memorize all of them, and that's a very impressive, not only to Imelda, but to her cousins, and of course to the other elder relatives of the Romualdeses, because sila nga may prayer book. They were reading from the prayer book, whereas Marcos, newly converted to Catholicism, has memorized all of those prayers for Holy Week. Anyway, that was how it was until one day, Sabado de Gloria, that was after fasting and abstinence, Marcos invited Imelda for lunch. They ate at this famous restaurant in Baguio City. And Marcos didn't know that fried chicken was Imelda's favorite. But as she was eating, nakita ni Marcos na ang galing niyang kumain ng fried chicken. Malinis talaga ang paghimay, and you know how clean she was licking the bones and all. And then she even asked for his own chicken kasi hindi kumain si Marcos. He was just staring at her. And did not eat actually. So sige, binigay niya yung kanyang chicken. So you can imagine how happy Imelda was because that was her favorite. Anyway, from there, Marcus said, we have to go to, so you could see the strawberry fields, etc. and all, not realizing that on the other table, andun na pala yung judge. At the time, we didn't have municipal, how do you call it, municipal judges actually. I have the name of the judge somewhere. I wrote it down. So we had the judge there in the other table waiting with the marriage certificate tucked inside his Americana, his blazer. And he was just waiting for the cue from Congressman Marcos. And so when they got to Trinidad Valley, there they went to the municipio, not the municipio, that was what they called it at the time. That was the, oh yes, Justice Francisco Maria Chanco. That's the name of the judge who was there. And that was, they call it, he was the Justice of the Peace. I'm sorry. That was how they were called. Wala pa tayo ng mga municipal trial judge or regional trial judge. Yung sa munisipyo ang tawag sa kanila, Justice of the Peace. Siya yun, si Justice Francisco Maria Chanco. Siya yung nandun sa katabing lamesa nila when they were having lunch. So kasama na nila hanggang sa pumunta doon sa Trinidad Valley sa munisipyo doon. And then that was pretty fast because Imelda was made to sign the marriage certificate, and sabi ni Marcos, we're getting married here. And it was really so fast and so emphatic that Imelda couldn't refuse or could say no because parang napakabilis ng ginawa. And then the witnesses, I wrote down their names also. Of course, Jose Guevara, Joe Guevara, the journalist, was there. Then you have Jose Simpayco, and then Jose Tinsay, brother-in-law ni Speaker, and then of course Eugenio Perez. So those were the witnesses. I had to do some research on this so that I could mention this with authenticity. Na yung sa marriage certificate niya sa Trinidad, dito kay Francisco Maria Chanco, was an authentic marriage certificate. So yun na yun. And of course, because Joe Guevara was with them, ay kumalat na. The most eligible and the most handsome, the most decorated war hero, the bar top notcher, Congressman Ferdinand and Marcos got married in Trinidad Valley at the end of Holy Week, which is Sabado de Gloria. So na-announce na yan sa lahat. And naku, nagkagulo na. And that was it. How will they be able to break the news to Imelda's father? And so Ferdinand Marcos decided, I will write him 2 letters actually para explain how it happened that we got married in Baguio. So kumalat na yan na nahuli na si Marcos, who was supposed to be the most eligible bachelor in Congress, and then marami ng kwento tungkol doon kung sino-sino mga naghahabol sa kanya and so forth. And of course, Imelda was the prize of it all. There were also political underpinnings saying that ako, ang galing talaga ni Marcos, liberal siya, nakuha niya yung malaking partido ng mga nationalista coming from the Visayas, which is the Romualdez clan actually. So that was it. But of course, President Magsaysay was also elated by the fact na nag-asawa sila, si liberal and nationalist stalwarts. As a matter of fact, imagine Speaker of the House, first cousin niya si Imelda, and then of course Marcos, the head of the Liberal Party sa Congress, na nagbibigay sakit ng ulo sa kanila. So it was President Magsaysay who decided that the reception, because they got married at the church where Imelda used to stay before, yung kanilang ancestral home, katapat ng simbahan. Doon sa katapat din ng Singyan Hospital where her mother died, remember? So the grand reception was to be in Malacañang. The biggest in reception Malacañang ever had at the time. 3,000 guests, lahat sagot ng presidente, President Magsaysay at the time. He was so happy na nagsama yung dalawa, and the budget that finally approved, everything seemed okay. And there was the marriage of the Liberal and the Nationalista Party. It is a grand thing altogether. So yun ang simula ng sinasabi nga the unity of Ferdinand and Imelda. Pagkatapos ng kanilang kasal na malaking, sabi ko nga, in grande lahat yun. Anyway, so that also started their life together. After that, Marcos was planning to run for the third term in Congress, the third and last term. He was advised not to. Sinabihan siya na dyan sa Ilocos Norte, any person running the third term is jinxed, hindi mananalo yan. Well, Imelda was already married to Marcos at the time, so she said hindi pwedeng hindi siya mananalo. So who was the biggest contender against Marcos at the time? A very big family. I think it was the Samonte family, who was vying also for the seat in Congress. And so there's the story that Imelda tells us that she wanted to meet with this opposition candidate, an opposition against her husband. She wanted to meet with him para kumbinsin siya, wag na ka nang tumakbo. So nagpadala siya ng isang basket ng mangga, matamis na mangga. She was refused, ayaw makipag-meeting. So she sent several kaing, these are the big baskets now. Ayaw pa rin makipagkita sa kanya. Well, according to Imelda's story, nagpadala na siya ng isang jeep load ng mangga. Just asking for a meeting. And finally, he agreed. Okay, so she went to meet with him, sat with him, and it didn't take very long. Hindi na nga lalaban. Imelda was able to convince him. So Marcos won the third term as congressman. It was during this time that Senator Rojas, actually the father, telling Marcos, you have sacrificed your life in a way when you were fighting during the war, the medal soldier that you are. Then afterwards, you cannot hear me anymore? Hello? Hello? You're losing my audio? Okay. So as I've said, what was important then at the time, Senator Rojas was telling Marcos that, you're sacrificing so much for the sake of your country. You were a soldier, bemedaled soldier, and then you have so many ideas for the benefit of the country. Why don't you run for the presidency? Why don't you enter a higher office? So Marcos said, well, only a president can do that. So sabi ni Rosen, run for the presidency. So yun na one of those influencers, so to speak. But he was already targeting actually the presidency. But he had to take it one step at a time. So in Congress, after Congress, he decided to run for the Senate. And this time, this was a national campaign already. Early on, they had difficulty, both husband and wife, because of the number of people that would be going to their house in San Juan. Every day, thousands would actually be there, not just asking for favors, but greeting them and so forth. And Imelda suffered migraine headaches because of this. And that was when Marcos decided to bring her to the United States of America to have her checked and all of this. And so what was happening was, I think they said it was something like psychosomatic. She couldn't take the pressure of a political life because of all the people that she had to meet, all the different occasions she had to attend to, and so forth. And so at the time, Marcos said, okay, if that will save the life of my wife, then I give up politics. When Imelda heard this, she said, no, do not give up politics. That is your line. I will adjust myself to your political life. And so you could see that in the beginning talagang nahirapan siya na to adjust to that kind of a life. Remember, she just came from the province and all of that. Ang bilis ng kanilang wedding, and then all of a sudden, yun na ang nangyari. So that was it. Marcos ran for the Senate, pero hindi siya nagtagal. 2 years lang siya sa Senate. Then he became Senate President. And this is another side story. When he was Senate President, he had to have some gallbladder stones removed. So that was some kind of a minor major surgery. He was Senate President. He won by just 1 vote, actually. So medyo precarious pa yung kanyang pagkaupo doon. So much so that according to Imelda, she had, Marcos, right after surgery, just rested a bit, a day or so, and had to go back to the Senate. Kasi baka pag absent siya, magbutuhan, mawala na naman siya as Senate President. That was how, how intense the political fight was between the Nationalista and the Liberal anyway. So, and he was already gunning for the presidency. He was already aiming for that. 2 years in the Senate, iikot na lang siya and so forth. And then for the presidential elections that should be happening while he was in the Senate, he will be running for the presidency. And he was assured at the time, it was already President Diosdado Macapagal, the Liberal Party, kapartido niya. So he felt that this would be a walk in the park, But then Macapagal decided that he would run for the election. So sabi ni Marcos, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now to my plans for the presidency? And that was when he decided that he would join the Nacionalista Party. Remember, he was very popular. He's very well loved. He was the most articulate of them all. He was the shining star of the Liberal Party and could contribute to be the shining star likewise of the Nacionalista Party. So, but how to get in? Well, the grand old man of the Nacionalista Party, Amang Rodriguez, refused to take him in. So ang nangyari dyan, he had to be brought to the Secretary General, which was Senator Roy. And it was a Laurel that brought him to Senator Roy, and that was where he took his oath of office as a member of the Nacionalista Party. The rest is history. He was now in the Nacionalista Party. There was this big national convention. There were already candidates of the Nacionalista Party for the convention, Puyat, Pelaez, Tolentino, Lopez, and then Marcos came in. Naku, ang laking gulo nung pumasok siya. But nonetheless, with Imelda's charm, talking to the delegates, etc., and all that was where I first met her when she went to my father's place to invite him to join the vote for Marcos, because my father was carrying 10 delegates of the Nacionalista Party from the undivided Cotabato. Remember, at the time, Cotabato was the largest province of the country, and he had 10 delegates with him for the convention. And so Imelda, my father refused to meet with her at first, but had no choice. In 10 minutes after they finally met at the house, at our ancestral home in Tomas Morato, Imelda was able to convince him. So that was how I met Mrs. Marcos. She was the Senate President's wife at the time. She waited at the balcony, the lanai, if you would call it, of my grandmother's ancestral home. Waited for about an hour or so. Ang kasama niya was Marichu Vera Perez, Maceda. Wala pa si Fe at the time. Fe was finishing college. This was 1965, for the 1965 elections for the presidency. And Imelda was talking about the qualities of President Marcos, and then she asked me what my plans were. Sabi ko, I just finished my college degree in Santo Tomas, and I'm entering postgraduate at the university, etc., and all, and then possibly get married. And so she said, well, if you're going to get married, then you get Marcos as your sponsor. And marami nang pinag-usapan. But that was the first time I met her face to face, actually. And so that's history. Marcos ran for the presidency under the Nacionalista Party, and then he won it overwhelmingly. Kasi yung mga liberal na mga leader at the time, na liberal pa rin, were also his friends. They admired him, they respected him. So maraming tumulong sa kanya, maraming bumoto sa kanya, maraming nagdala sa kanya. You must remember, even for instance, in Palawan, you had the Mitras who were also in the liberal. Marami, and I have a whole list of those names actually, which are still the names you will find today. These are the grandparents of the politicians we have today. And even the Liberal Party leaders all admired him, respected him, and I don't know, openly or secretly, but they supported him, and that is why he won the presidency in 1965 overwhelmingly. And he was here in this location where I am right now because this was used as a safe house during his campaign. It was here when it was announced on radio, the unofficial tabulation of votes that Marcos won the presidency. The rest is history. So it took a while before they moved into Malacañang because Malacañang had to be refurbished and, of course, many other things done. And then, of course, you had Ferdinand and Imelda now occupying Malacañang Palace. And that was the time Imelda asked, Ferdinand, you are now the president of the country. I am the first lady. What am I supposed to do? And that's when President Marcos told her, I will build a home. I'll make it strong. I'll make it stand against all storms. You will make it a home. And so that's when Imelda went back to what makes a home. It is love that makes a home. And what is love? Love is God made real. And that was where you have now the emblem of the Cultural Center of the Philippines, the true, the good, and the beautiful, taking it from the statement of our Greek philosopher that is the essence of all life, and that is what love is, the true, the good, and the beautiful. It hangs there as a banner with the ancient writing in Filipino of the true, the good, and the beautiful. So that was how Imelda and Ferdinand were together in Malacañang for 20 years. And of course, I will have to summarize, not just for this program, but perhaps for a later date, all the many things that they have done for the country. The first, of course, that Imelda did was the Cultural Center of the Philippines, because for his inauguration in 1965, she invited Rockefeller to come to attend the inauguration, but he got ill. He got the flu, I think, or something in India on his way to the Philippines. And so he said, I cannot come because I might be contaminating all of you with my coughing. But I will send somebody, I will request, to send somebody to attend in my behalf. And that was when Ronald Reagan, governor of California, came on behalf of Rockefeller to attend the inauguration of Ferdinand Marcos, the president of the Republic of the Philippines, and the first lady, Imelda Romualdez Marcos. And that was when she was touring Rockefeller along Rojas Boulevard, she pointed to the open sea and said, there, Mr. Rockefeller will rise the Cultural Center of the Philippines. And he said, Imelda, that's all water. And she said, well, in the first year of the presidency of Ferdinand, the land will rise over the water. In the second year, the building will rise over the land. And in the third year, the curtains will rise. And so that was it. That was the history of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. What she wanted to project was, in every Filipino, in all of us, we have this creativity, the talent that we all have, that will have to be surfaced if we are only given the opportunity to bring it out. That is why she has called the Cultural Center of the Philippines the sanctuary of the Filipino soul, where the performances in all fields of art, music, painting, sculpture, literature will be exhibited to the Filipino people and to the world, because that is where the greatness of the Filipino lies. That's why it is so important that she gives emphasis to the value of the human being in every one of us. And that, I think, is what has been pursued all throughout the presidency of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. And many of the projects I've undertaken, it has all been centered, higit sa lahat ang tao. Exactly how that slogan carried on to the Bagong Lipunan song, to the Bagong Lipunan march that they have initiated. And it carries on up to this day in the sun with this Bagong Alyansang Pilipinas, Of course, not in the same lyrics or the same beat, but with the ideological base that in every Filipino there is a greatness that lies and we only have to surface it. That's the love story of Ferdinand and Imelda to each other and to the Filipino people. We recall this, I recall this at this particular time, just in memory of the fact that on May 1st, that was their wedding day. And that was the anniversary that is celebrated every May 1st between the two souls and the two hearts of Imelda and Ferdinand. I will never tire talking about this in the same manner that I will always look forward to the fact that one day we may have a resurgence of this malakas and maganda in the both of them, and that we can have the ideal society that we dream about, the ideal society that was promised by their son, Ferdinand Edralin Marcos Jr., who is Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. right now, who occupies the seat of the presidency. We not only keep our fingers crossed, that we pray that all will be well, despite all the turmoil and problems that may be encountered by the world in general, and politically also here in the Philippines, we may be able to achieve after this election the threshold of that horizon that all of us dream about. I do not wish to bring back what it was 40 years ago during the time of the Marcoses, or from 1965 to 1986, but I can speak of it with some amount of confidence and with some amount of respect that in the 20 years that Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos served the Filipino people, I was there somewhere behind the curtains, broadcasting all of this for all of you. And after so many years, because of this channel now that we have, I am able to recall and to talk about it in a manner that is given not just remembrances or reminiscences or nostalgia, but actually the fact that we hold that in deep respect and in great honor. So happy anniversary, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos, on May 1st. Ferdinand has gone ahead of us in 1989, but his spirit lives in the heart and soul of Imelda. She's there, and I'm sure that she will always remember how valuable and important it was to be together with her husband, as both of them worked for the benefit of every Filipino during their time. You must recall that how many elections we may have had at the time. So we had elections in 1965. Oh, there were three candidates. It was actually Macapagal, was the incumbent president of the Liberal Party and also president at the time. Then Marcos, who was a senator, Senate president, and he won that election. But there was another candidate. You will remember his name, Raul Manglapus. He organized another party, the PPP, Progressive Filipino something, the PPP, a third political party. But it was Marcos who won in that election. And then we had the re-election of Marcos in 1969. He was opposed by Sergio Osmeña of Cebu. You see how important Cebu is. Now you have the distribution of the 20 peso per kilo rice supposedly to start in Cebu after the elections. So he ran in 1969 for re-election and he won against the Osmeña. Sergio Osmeña was really that is Osmeña territory, so to speak. Parang sinabi mo nanalo si Osmeña sa Ilocos, di ba? So Marcos won in 1969, and there another election. Marcos also won against Alejo Santos, another presidential election, and then finally in 1986 we had the snap election against Marcos. Was opposed by Corazon Aquino, the candidate of the Americans, if we would call it that. Actually, we know this now as a fact in history. And he won that election likewise by about a little over 1 billion votes. So how many times did he run for the presidency? 65, 69, 81, and 86. He would have been president until 87, but decided because of American pressure to call for those snap elections in 1986. And after that, you have the story of exile and the rest. Again, as I said, it's part of history. I was there. covering all of this, and perhaps for another episode of our chronicles, I can be able to talk about it. But for now, this is just a love story of two persons, the malakas and maganda of our um, ethnic mythological genesis, both of them carrying the attributes of who is strong, malakas, and maganda, which also includes ang kabaitan and many other virtues and values that both these symbols of our myths and our genesis actually embodied. I will talk about that too sometime in the future, although I've already mentioned this also in some of our chronicles and the Rita Gadi Hour early on. We've been at this for about 8 years, and perhaps for as long as I can be able to talk, and for as long as my memory still holds, I will be able to talk about this as often as necessary. But for now, for Ferdinand and Imelda, this was your love story, and we thank you for having been with us for 20 years of your lives for us during the time. Imelda will be celebrating her 96th birthday shortly, in a couple of months, as a matter of fact, in July. I'm sure that she carries with it in her heart the memory of a great and noble man named Ferdinand and Marcos. Thank you for having joined me. This is Rita Gadi, and this has been your Chronicles. God bless us.